The president had a phone interview with the BBC, the British Broadcasting Corporation. I want to play you an excerpt of this. It's an audio conversation. It was by phone. This is the president and the BBC.
You've said you were 4 times close to a deal with Putin.
Yeah, I thought I had a deal 4 times.
Are you done with him? I mean, I know that sounds a simplistic thing.
But I'm disappointed in him. But I'm not done with him. But I'm disappointed in him. So we had a deal done 4 times, and then you go home and you see he just attacked a nursing home or something in Kiev. I said, what the hell was that all about?
Do you trust him?
I trust almost nobody, to be honest with you.
So how do you deal with someone you can't trust?
Well, it's not a question of that. It's like I'm disappointed that this hasn't been done.
That's the president, disappointed in Vladimir Putin. Well, it turns out the Ukrainians might have a secret ally who has persuaded the president to move to the right on Ukraine. And in particular, by move right, traditional Republican foreign policy. For those of you who weren't around yesterday, who hadn't heard the news, the president has decided to rearm and significantly arm the Ukrainians. There is a report from the Financial Times today that's actually a pretty big deal. Trump has privately, this is from the Financial Times, Trump has privately encouraged Ukraine to step up deep strikes on Russian territory, even asking Zelenskyy whether he could strike Moscow if the U.S. provided long-range weapons, according to people briefed on the discussions. A pretty big deal. The conversation, which took place on the July 4th call between the U.S. and Ukrainian leaders, marks a sharp departure from Trump's previous stance on Russia's war and his campaign promise to end U.S. involvement. While it remains unclear whether Washington will deliver such weapons, the discussion underscores Trump's deepening frustrations with Vladimir Putin's refusal to engage in ceasefire talks. The conversations with Zelenskyy on July 4th were precipitated by Trump's call with Putin a day earlier, which the U.S. president described as bad. 2 people familiar with the conversation between Trump and Zelenskyy said the U.S. president had asked his Ukrainian counterpart whether he could hit military targets deep inside Russia if he provided weapons capable of doing so. Vladimir, can you hit Moscow? Can you hit St. Petersburg? Trump asked on the call. They said Zelenskyy replied, absolutely, we can if you give us the weapons. Trump signaled his backing for the idea, describing the strategy as intended to make them feel pain and force the Kremlin to the negotiating table. A Western official said the conversation reflected a growing desire among Ukraine's Western partners to supply long-range weapons capable of bringing the war to Muscovites, a sentiment echoed privately by American officials in recent weeks. The White House in Ukraine's presidential office did not respond to requests for comment. The discussion between Trump and Zelenskyy led to a list of potential weapons for Kyiv being shared by the U.S. side with the Ukrainian president in Rome last week, according to 3 people with knowledge of the conversations. During a meeting with U.S. defense officials and intermediaries from NATO governments, Zelenskyy received a list of long-range strike systems that potentially could be made available to Ukraine via third-party transfers. The arrangement would allow Trump to sidestep the need for congressional approval on direct U.S. military aid by authorizing weapons sales to European allies who then passed the systems to Kyiv. The Ukrainians had asked for Tomahawk missiles, precision strike cruise missiles with a range of about 1,600 kilometers. But the Trump administration, like the Biden administration, has concerns about Ukraine's lack of restraint. The president is, however, going to give Ukraine updated Patriot missile batteries. Now, for those of you wondering, 1,600 kilometers is 994 miles. You would be able to get pretty far into Russian territory. This is a pretty dramatic escalation between Ukraine and Russia if this happens, these long-range missiles. Well, it turns out the Ukrainians might actually have a bit of an ally inside the White House people weren't expecting, and it actually makes some sense. This is the president during his press conference yesterday with Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, talking about a conversation with the First Lady of the United States.
I go home, I tell the First Lady, and I spoke to Vladimir today. We had a wonderful conversation. She said, oh, really? Another city was just hit. So it's like, look.
Yeah. Had a wonderful conversation with Vladimir, and the First Lady was like, oh, really? Another city was hit. Now, for those of you who do not know, the First Lady of the United States was born behind the Iron Curtain. She was born in Slovenia. Actually, Slovenia was part of Yugoslavia. And Yugoslavia at the time was a dictatorship, and a very unpleasant dictatorship. Melania Trump's father was a member of the Communist Party. He had his family secretly baptized as Roman Catholic. They, according to her biography, actually did not have a meager existence, but she was required to work in a factory as a child, a communist-run factory. She began to idolize the United States. She began to discover who Ronald Reagan was. And CNN International in 1985 made it into Yugoslavia. She got to see what America was like. She paid attention to global fashion. And she was apparently, by all accounts, strongly pro-Ronald Reagan because he brought about the collapse of the Soviet Union and the Iron Curtain. One of the things that we know about Melania Trump's family is that though her father was in the Communist Party, they were not big fans of the Soviets. Here comes Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin was a KGB agent. Vladimir Putin was a guy who wanted to restore the glories of the Soviet Empire. Vladimir Putin is a man who wanted to rebuild the Iron Curtain and the Russian sphere of influence. Melania Trump is American now. She is the American First Lady. But she's from a failed communist state that Vladimir Putin wants back within the sphere of influence of the Russians. Do you really think she's passive in this? Do you really think she doesn't have an interest in this? She knows. She knows what the Soviets were like. She lived it. She was born in the 1970s. She was born in 1970. She lived in the Iron Bloc country, or the Eastern Bloc countries. She became an American, a fan of Ronald Reagan. I'm pretty sure that this is a woman who understands that Ukraine needs to survive. And isn't it interesting how the President of the United States, after this encounter with Vladimir Putin, goes and talks to his wife? His wife pokes at him over Putin continuing to bomb Ukraine. And what is Donald Trump's response? His response is to arm the Ukrainians and see if they might be able to bomb Moscow. His response is to flow weapons through to NATO allies, bypassing the persnickety problem of the president getting his MAGA supporters in Congress, many of whom don't want to fund Ukraine, to get around it. The president gets to make money off of NATO. The president gets to see these countries boost their weapons development and spending by giving us money. And he's changed his position as well on defending Ukraine. You know, it's funny. I see a comment online. All the president saw was an opportunity to milk NATO like a cow after they've done the same to us for decades without paying their fair share. Any other explanation to spin? I don't think that's the case at all. I don't think that is the case at all. I think that's kind of a dumb bottom line there. The fact that the president of the United States is having calls with the president of Ukraine to see if they could bomb Moscow and St. Petersburg if we gave them the weapons is a pretty big deal. The president wants it known that he's interested in doing this because he's really committed to trying to get some level of peace out of Ukraine. He really wants to wind that war down. He wants that as part of his foreign policy legacy. And there is a growing sense among the president's advisors who are willing to engage that one of the reasons the Russians aren't willing to even consider peace is because they're not feeling any pain in this. Their economy has now been converted into a wartime economy. They've sent a lot of their criminals to the front line, so their prisons are less full. There are certainly deaths happening, but the Russians aren't feeling direct day-to-day pain in the way the Ukrainians are. They aren't regularly being bombed. They aren't regularly being attacked. And here comes the First Lady of the United States to needle the president over this, and suddenly we have a big change. I don't think there's a coincidence there. I really don't think it's a coincidence. And I also think the way the president has structured this is the perfect compromise for the president. He doesn't want to spend a lot more money on Ukraine, but he's clearly now willing, has a change of heart. He's willing to support him. And the NATO allies are willing to pick up the tab. Instead of loans that are backed by the EU from Ukraine, we just give the money, we give everything to the EU partners we have within NATO. That means that he can bypass Congress. That means he doesn't have to put people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who is anti-funding Ukraine but a staunch supporter of the president, in a difficult position. Notice these guys in Congress who are not in favor of supporting Ukraine have said very little about this. The president gets what he wants. He gets to help Ukraine, potentially expand the parameters of the war with Russia, trying to get Russia to the table to make them show that Ukraine can actually be emboldened to go after him. And maybe he can finally get the Russians to the table. The fact that he's willing immediately to send Patriot missile batteries to Ukraine is something, because remember, a couple weeks ago, what was the word out of the Pentagon when they suspended the arms to Ukraine? Part of it was our own supplies are running low, including the Patriot missile batteries, and we may need to send some to Israel. And now suddenly we're sending them not just Patriot missile batteries, but the updated versions, not the old versions. We're sending them the bleeding edge Patriot missile batteries. And by the way, the old Patriot missile batteries were already defending against the Russians pretty successfully. It's wild that our prior generations of military tech are able to keep the advanced Russians at bay, and now we're going to send the Ukrainians even more cutting-edge technology. So in other words, if our prior generations' technology were able to defend against the Russians, what will our current bleeding-edge technology do? Time to put it into the battlefield and see, it looks like, as we arrange this and structure it to go through NATO so that Congress doesn't have to approve. It's not a bad way to go, and it just shows you with the First Lady from behind the Iron Curtain whispering in the president's ear, the dynamics may be starting to change in a war where the Ukrainians have been able to hold off the Russians this long. Now they might be able to expand on the front and take some territory back too. That would probably push the Russians to the table. Trump's foreign policy continues to show way more maturity than a lot of people have wanted to give him credit for.